Assalamu alaikum. A very dear friend of mine asked these videos I've been posting recently if I would do something on Rumi. And, I have to give a disclaimer before I do say anything about Rumi, although I feel very connected in some ways in the unseen realm, to be honest, with Rumi. But having been introduced to his writings in translation in the 60s, long before I became Muslim, I read in the Masnavi a statement. He said, to become Muslim, all you need to do is to make the declaration that there is no God but God, the God, and that Muhammad is his messenger. And I thought, how interesting that is. That's all you have to do. There's no things to join, no papers to sign. A year before I became Muslim, I was in San Francisco, and I was on the street, Market Street, and I was on, it was a daytime, and I remembered what he said, and I thought, well, let's see what happens. And I said aloud on that street corner, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. And I waited for something to take place. Probably a year later, I was singing prayers, asking God, God, please forgive me for wanting something more, but there is something more. You've been so generous, but forgive me for wanting something more. And I was praying that, and I was singing it as a prayer as well. I also sang at that time, I sang the excerpts and concepts from Rumi and lines from Rumi in English, that as I was playing music and improvising music for performing at that time. It was probably a year later that I was making that prayer and asking God for something more. And I met a Muslim, and that's when I made my Shahada formally at that time. So the further sort of anecdotal realities that I've experienced around Rumi was that I ended up going to England and playing music. And I was with a group of musicians who had been rock and roll musicians, Mighty Baby they were called. And we were improvising music just at random in this man's house. And as we were singing, it was being recorded at the time. And what's interesting is, as we were singing, I noticed behind me in a bookshelf, like bookshelves here, there's Rumi on these bookshelves, in fact. I noticed a book of Rumi poems, probably translated by Arbery, something like that, pulled it out and opened it up. And I read, the first line was, I am a bird of God's garden. I do not belong to this world. And I began to sing that with a melody and improvised it. And they played along with me, and we made that recording. Now, what's interesting is that recording was never published, or not until decades later. But it somehow found its way into the world to the point at which there's been several recordings and people recording it, different artists recording it, maybe 4 or 5. And I just heard recently that there's another recording of it coming out soon by another group. So, this is Allah's hand and his commands in the unseen realm, which we have to honor. When I was in Pakistan and studying medicine, I connected with the Sabriya Chistiya Sufi tariqa. And that was under the auspices or under the teachings of Sheikh Shahidullah Faridi, an amazing man, mashallah, Allah bless him in the greatest way. And he lived in a very modest home in the middle of Karachi and served all of these people, poor people and wealthy people who come from India and other places too, to be with him. Remarkable, unique man of all the shuyukh I've met in my life. One of the most humble and most filled with barakah. But we used to spend time, and they taught me the Chistiya Sufis. As they said, well, that makes sense. When I told them these stories, they said that makes sense because Rumi is the one in the spiritual world that introduces people to Islam. And with a universal kind of message, at a time that he became, at one point, the most popular poet in America, although the people were not Muslims and they didn't necessarily connect him with Islam. And somehow, again, by Allah's design, I was surprised that this even took place. This is also due to a dear friend of mine, that I found myself at Harvard, and the program was meant to give a lecture on Rumi, and I did it. I did that presentation. I also did it nearby at Wellesley, and in Emerson Hall of all places, very, very prestigious. And I was kind of amazed. And there I was with a couple of hundred people at least. I'm not sure how many. But I thought, well, what am I? I'm not a scholar. I can't read Rumi in the original language. But I did have this experience with him. In a way, I say I made shahada as a result of him. And so it demonstrated what these Chishtiya Sufis said. And I know so many through these many years being a Muslim, people who were introduced to Islam through Rumi. So there I was in Harvard in this auditorium, and I thought, what do I do here? I mean, what do I say? I'm not a scholar, but I have these feelings about Rumi, and my heart recognizes. So what I did, I felt very sort of bold, and I just began singing, I am a bird of God's garden. I do not belong to this world. I am a bird of God's garden. I do not belong to this dusty world. And the rest of the poem I sang. But I've been singing that ever since. And those recordings are out there in the world. I had probably about 5 different artists. So anyway, Allah bless Rumi in the greatest way possible. He brings a deep understanding to much of what is in Islam. The focus I gave at the Harvard lecture was to underline the fact that he was a very, I don't want to use the word orthodox, but he was a very much a Muslim. And all within the Sharia of Islam, a scholar of Islam and from a family of scholars. But I wanted to point out to them that Islam and what he taught, or what he's teaching, and what we see in the wisdom from him, is at the essence of it is in Islam and in the guidance of Islam, inshallah. So, alhamdulillah, I hope you all have a chance to, if you're not already fans of Rumi, that you have a chance to look deeply into his work. The barakah comes from that, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.